Hey, what's up? This is David DeVore with the What If We Could show, where every week we ask that question to burning questions around artificial intelligence, tech alpha. Potentially, we talk about blockchain as well as user interface design and so forth. Super excited because this week we have all four MeshMesh co-founders in the room. We've got Bob, we've got Calvin, we've got Kevin, and myself. And this week we're going to break open a really awesome topic, which is talking about using artificial intelligence to support those autistic and people who are neurodivergent in living a better life. And so super excited about popping this open. So let me hand it over to you, Bob, to kick it off and talk about your experience and sort of how we have come to this topic and what we're hoping to do potentially.
Yeah, I'd love to. And let's just start by setting the table. No topic off limits here. We're very transparent, open book. It's been a long journey with Easton, my 9-year-old. It's hard to encapsulate 9 years of a brain dump into a podcast. So, but open book. If you got questions, let me know. I'm actually the father of two autistic children. My 6-year-old is also on the spectrum, though not as severe as my 9-year-old. I'll start with just a really kind of fun alignment to autism, I think, which is, in our experience anyways, both with our kids and others that we've met, oftentimes we see that these kids have one or more superpowers too. And so I want to start there. Easton's superpower, I think, is creativity. He loves to draw, he paints, he loves to sing. Even though he doesn't talk, he loves to sing, especially nursery rhymes, stuff like that. And Murphy's superpower is math, like profoundly so, savant level math. When he was in kindergarten, he's in first grade now. He's in third grade math class currently. And in kindergarten, he was reciting prime numbers up to like 500 off memory. Nothing I taught him. I did not ask him to memorize prime numbers. He just got into them and started internalizing them and does some fairly complex math just mentally, which is really interesting. And other than that, he's an absolutely normal 6-year-old. You know, he loves doing all the things that 6-year-olds do, playing Roblox, running around outside, as does Easton. Very physical, loves to scooter, loves to bike, loves to run, loves to do all the things that typical 9-year-olds do too. So you'll often hear parents of just, I think, generally kids with special needs say the sort of phrase like, I wouldn't change them if I could. And that's absolutely true. I don't know who he would be if he wasn't himself, and we love him. And here we are talking about how AI might be able to improve his life. And I'm just really excited by that, and certainly very grateful to have you all helping in that endeavor. I think it's a very exciting sandbox to play in, not because it impacts our family directly, but it's interesting application of technology to improve people's lives even more broadly than just autism. And theoretically makes it a wonderful business too, where you can do well and do good simultaneously. And I'm always excited for those opportunities.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think one of the things that you brought up that's really interesting, right? And especially when we talk about autism and neurodivergence, is like it rightly termed, it is a spectrum, and the way that each individual's brain behaves, and also their capabilities and ability to navigate the world, is not only very different from our own, but very different from each other. And each person has some characteristics in terms of how they operate, but also can widely vary from age and experience out to what their superpowers are. And so one of the things I think that's really interesting about this topic and it merges with other topics that we've talked about is AI ultimately it has the ability to create really individual experiences at scale. And so when we think about even the myriad of apps and tools out there that have been developed for people to be able to accelerate learning or be able to accelerate behaviors of pattern and whatnot. They are all while somewhat personalized, they still are very deterministic, right? And so one of the things I think that's really exciting about where the technology can help is that we can think about um, individual tools for individual people, and individual experiences in real time that are supportive, right? And so what I'd love to sort of unpack a little bit is the how we came to the conclusion based on our prototype, which was very different. Our prototype was, uh, you know, taking a F1 race, and providing all of the real time data around that race to then provide a feedback loop in real time to an announcer, right? So I'd love to sort of say, how do we get from there to saying, wow, this is interesting in my own use case of, how do we help Easton, right?
Yeah.
And so it's super fun to sort of think about the technology and how we can apply the technology in very interesting ways, but in a lot of ways it's the same stuff underneath the hood.
Yeah. I mean, when we were for everybody listening in the podcast, I think it was Thanksgiving week. We had an opportunity to build a POC collectively as a proxy uh, to the Abu Dhabi Racing League, and we aligned to a race that was going on live for F1 racing. And the general premise behind this was, can we have an agent really observing the environment of the race, right? And an environment in this POC was, can it consume information from lots of different sources in real time and then form ideas about what's going on in the race? Like, can it add value from an entertainment perspective or maybe a historical one, statistics, like just add additional layers on top of the commentary. And so that agent was watching live blogs from F1 and social channels. It had some information on the history of F1 in terms of like who has won previous races and the sort of history of success and drivers and cars and teams and all that. And then the last bit was the really, I think, very interesting part, which was it was watching ESPN live. And what it was doing was consuming the audio from the stream, right? And internalizing it. So audio comes in, transcribe it to text, and put it into the brain, just like it came from the blog or from any other source that we were piping into it. And then it would wake up and say, is there anything interesting to say right now? And we collectively, all of us sort of sprinted to do that like 2 days before Thanksgiving. And I was on my way to a family event in Iowa for Thanksgiving, having worked shotgun on this thing. And when I got there, it was on my mind. So I was showing my extended family this thing. And that's where it really clicked, right? Because Easton's in the room and they were spending quality time with them. And I sort of had this epiphany. It's like the ability for an agent to observe an environment from many different angles at the same time is clear, totally feasible. And we proved that. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could do the same for Easton, who largely has a problem observing and internalizing his environment? And so that's kind of where we started in terms of the concept. Wouldn't it be interesting if there was an agent could listen in on Easton's environment when he's doing things, and sort of prompt him, instead of him prompting the AI, can the AI prompt him to work on some of the skills and goals that are set out in his individualized education plan from the state, what's called an IEP. All special needs kids have one. It's mandatory by federal law. Every special needs kid in a public school has an IEP. And what that means is all the admins, the parents, everybody in his orbit comes together once a month, or depending on your school system, however long. And we establish goals and we measure his performance against those goals, and we course correct so that he's getting the resources he needs to learn the skills in order to, operate in the world like anybody else. And so that's where it sort of came to a head. Wouldn't it be great if he's, asking Alexa to play a nursery rhyme, and we know he's working on what's called WH questions: who, what, where, when, how. His typical motion is to ask Alexa to play Old MacDonald, 100 times in a row. And that's the extent of the interaction. Wouldn't it be great if this agent could prompt him after that song and be like, "Hey, Easton, why don't you ask Alexa what kind of animals are on a farm?" And though it sounds benign to us, to him it's a feedback loop, right? It sort of helps harden those connections in his brain, just like any AI model we're going to put together, right? That connection gets more highly weighted, and he knows when he's curious about something that he can ask a what question or a how or a where question, and start to work on really the bigger goal, which is, two-way conversation. He's not there yet. But those are the small stepping stones to get there. And I think there's a ton of value to sort of have that side by side proxy for his technicians that he's worked with in autism centers, sort of being there in a light mode to continue that work as he goes, so he can harden those skills as he learns.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Like, would you say that it is basically, I mean, if you look at GPT or if you look at transformer technology in general, right, it is basically that transforming one quote unquote truth to another truth, right? Like one mapping them together in an n-dimensional space. And we say that could directly apply then to, the autism spectrum or the neurodivergence. Like, do you think, like, basically would it be evaluating or building or training a specific model to do that, right? To see where the gaps are, and then quote unquote, what should this translate to? Is that a fair way of seeing how also an IEP would work?
Yeah, you jumped the shark. That's exactly where my mind goes, right? Like, this initial swag, I think, is incredibly valuable, right? Like, bringing the IEP, that's easy to reconcile in an LLM, and here's an opportunity to work on a goal that's, known. But man, LLMs on fine-tuned models, even not fine-tuned, but really great at translation and transformation, right? And I think that's probably one of the big gaps, at least from Easton. But I also have a hunch, autism spectrum disorder in general, and I'm not a certified expert here, so I may use the taxonomy wrong, but I have this hunch that many of them have a hard time sort of processing the world in the same way we do. It's like if I said, "Hey, this picture is green," how do I know that my green is the same green that you see out of your eyes? Maybe it looks like my blue to you. It's sort of weird to think about in that way. And so I think the future here, and I hope we can iterate towards this if we're successful here, is this notion of like personalized models. And the way that Easton views the world, can we create a model that can translate that view for him, or vice versa, real world into his model, so that he can parse what he's seeing? An example of that is he spent 6 years at a ABA center, applied behavioral analysis, which is a form of therapy for autism, where there's a lot of repetitive tasking, exercises, drills, right? And early on, they work on things like association. An example of that is a flashcard, right? So, "Easton, what's this?" And they'd hold up a picture of a dog. And so you go ask him in the real world, if we're at the grocery store, I don't know if you see a dog at the grocery store, but let's go with it. There's a dog at the grocery store. "Easton, what's that?" He wouldn't know. Why? Because it's not drawn in black and white on the flashcard. He's associated the black and white hand-drawn dog from his card to what a dog is, every representation of a dog. Of course, we know there's a million, I don't even know how many variants of breeds of dogs there are. I think there's a future here where there's, beyond audio, it's heads up guidance. Like, could it translate things he's seeing through a Apple Vision Pro or Google Glass like device, and say, "Oh, the device is seeing a dog," and then translating it back to the flashcard that he knows, so that he can begin to build those associations between something he knows to all the variants that might be in the real world. And that's probably a function of a very personalized model that's trained on his interactions with the world and trying to find those correlations between things that we don't see being correlated.
It's fascinating, right? Because exactly what you said is like how much can it augment to, like, say, quote unquote, experience more of the shared reality to make the day-to-day, the everyday life experience easier for him, right? I think that's what you touched on now, is one of the big aspects that it could potentially do. How do you feel about sort of the other side of the spectrum? Because you mentioned sort of the superpower aspect of it. And what I'm curious to see is, like, how would you balance nurturing both sides of the spectrum? Because a transformer model could essentially do both potentially, right? One could be make your everyday day-to-day translation exercise, or the navigating the environment easier, but it can also detect or figure out, like, where can it help enhance sort of, where already existing, capabilities, skills, or, quote unquote superpowers are, right? So it could do both. And, like, how do you balance that? Because I think what is interesting with what you mentioned with, like, the ABA or the EIPs is, like, they're obviously more skewed towards putting that into the more shared reality experience of the site versus, harnessing some of the exciting capabilities that are there too. So basically the question is, like, how do you feel about balancing the two?
I think it's an opportunity, right? And could you blend the two? Is there a concentric circle here? And what I mean by that is, like I said, he loves being creative, loves to draw, as an example. Alexa not required, nursery rhymes not required, right? Just if he's in the moment, one exercise could be inserting WH questions, again, just one goal in his IEP, into the creative process. Something we want to kind of POC here too is this notion of LCM or latent stable diffusion, but high horsepower and fast. So, like, wouldn't it be cool if he's drawing something, or if he's just even working on verbalization of something he wants to see on the device and is generating in real time? Maybe the agent comes over the top, like, what else should we add here, Easton? Like, there's plenty of opportunity to mix in those exercises on goal attainment into the activity he loves doing, and probably a huge value there too, so that he enjoys going through the process because he's actively doing something he likes doing versus having to think of it more like a drill. Like, I don't know any kid that would want to do that over and over. And just a little thing I'll share. He's the most sweet human being you ever met in your life. There's not a mean bone in his body. Seriously. He's got the disposition of probably a 3 or 4-year-old, and is a very sweet one, right? And so you can think of a 3-year-old on his best day is Easton's demeanor. And he's a work horse too. And to put in perspective, like, for ABA therapy, it's a medical service. It's not an education one. So, they follow bank holidays. The kid over 6 years had 8 days off a year. And he went to ABA therapy from 8:30 in the morning until 4:30 p.m. every day for 6 years with 8 days off a year. And he's still the most cheery young man you ever met in your life. So he's down to work big time. I like to say he gets it from me. I think he probably gets it from mom, but there's perfect test subject for tinkering, and maybe an opportunity, since I'm his dad, I can clear out some of the red tape faster than we would otherwise. But there's lots of trials to be had, and lots of cool concepts we could try with him.
Definitely gets his work ethic from his dad. I'll vouch for that. You can give credit to mom too. We'll clip that for her. To Calvin, I wanted to throw out, take a slight detour, throw out an analogy for a moment, thinking about the question you posed, right? Balancing both increasing proficiency, but also doubling down on superpower, right? So there's an assessment. This is I'm now jumping into the realm of business, of career growth, and using this as an analogy here. There's an assessment called Strength Finders. Are you familiar with that, Calvin or Dave?
I'm not.
Heard that? So it's one of my favorites. I got introduced to it a long time ago, and as you know, in business, there's a lot of different in professional development. There's a lot of different assessments, and they say a lot of different things. Myers-Briggs is the easiest, most approachable that people understand about personality, for example. The Strength Finders is more about the your controllables and as an individual, and so I found it really helpful to help others understand themselves in their development. And the theory is you do this assessment, 45 minutes to answer a bunch of questions, and out of that, it breaks it down into about, I think it's 36 different skill sets that breaks down professions in. Right. So you have things like communication and strategy and futurist, for example, as some of these different categories. And you get back this report and it tells you your top 5 strengths. It says, what are you really great at? Right. / what do you really enjoy doing as well? So these are really kind of one and the same, merging those together. And then conversely, it gives you pay for it and you get the full report. You get all 36 skills ranked. So now you know what are at the bottom of your list as well. And you might think, well, hey, I need to go double down on the ones on the bottom and increase those, right? So if I got 100 units of time to go do professional development, improve myself, I should take those bottom 5 skills and 50% of the time there, and maybe smear 50% at the top or something like that, and start coming up with ways to say, how do I get better? I obviously need to improve the things I'm the worst at. And so I've had the chance to manage a lot of different people and positions, but the one I think of the most is in product management. And product management's a profession where it encompasses so many different skills because it is this amorphous job depending on the organization, the situation, the product, the team, the timing. It can mean a lot of things. And regardless of exactly what it means in any organization, it usually means a lot more things than a lot of other jobs. And so I've had a lot of career conversations with product managers, and I've done this assessment with them, and I've shared with them both in setting expectations of what I expect out of a teammate, but then also helping them grow. And it's a lot of conversations around, here are the different areas of the role of product management. I need you to be proficient across these areas, right? I need you to be at the proficient level. You will not be a 10 out of 10 at what is effectively, like, call it 10 different jobs, 10 different skill sets. You won't be, and that's okay. I need you to be proficient. And then I want to help you find your superpower where you crush 1 or 2 of those that you can run forward with. And I can help you get a promotion by using that skill to excel, and you can leverage that through the rest of your professional career, right? So to me, now to bring it all the way back to what we're talking about, when I hear you, Calvin, ask about like how could you balance that, that feels like just an amazing opportunity, right? Bring a child up to proficient at different skills, and then let them run with their superpower and let them go crush it. They have something to offer to the world that's differentiated, and if we could help them unlock a fraction of that, would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, the other opportunity that I think, I looked around and becoming familiar with some of the tools out there, and there's part of the challenge, of course, is communication, right? And I think part of the opportunity is like also helping caregivers, right? And I'm interested from your perspective, like when we think about Easton's communication style, there's also folks who are completely nonverbal, and they're that can be a real challenge for caregivers to understand what they need, to understand what they want. To understand what they're feeling. And I'm sort of also, thinking about ways that of helping while an AI could potentially help consume the world for a person who's autistic. It could also translate their world out to caregivers, right, as well. And I'd love to just we haven't really talked about this in any way when we've talked about Easton's Copilot, but I'd love to just sort of ask, like, is that what do you think? Like, what would that potentially look like for you, for Easton, and where do you think sort of LLMs and artificial intelligence can play a role to help on that side of the fence?
Lot of thoughts come in my mind. I'll start with a dream of mine, right? In terms of like one moment I have in my mind that if we can achieve this, we know that we've made a dent in the universe. This one thing, and it's very, very simple. So since he was 2 years old ish, and still today, sometimes he'll walk around and he will write something in the air with his finger. We to this day cannot figure out what he's writing. And it has impacted a lot of people in his life are also curious about this, including the teachers and techs he's had in ABA therapy. He finished ABA in December. He's now full-time in the public school system. We want to start working on academics too. But when we left, they threw a going away party for him. And his first tech ever is completing his master's now, 6 years later. And Easton was also his very first client. And so made him decide this is what he wanted to do with his life as an adult, right? He's probably late 20s, so sort of starting the career. And when we had that going away party, they gave us this book. And in the book was a page for every one of the technicians that worked with him ever, with a Polaroid and a handwritten note from each of them. And it was like 45 pages long. Incredible. Awesome. And the last page was a tech that he had last year for, I think, a few months. And at the end of this, he had a PS and he said, I always wanted to know what you were spelling in there. I hope one day I'm able to figure that out and find out. And to bring this back, like, I think there is a solve here, right? If we can train models on his behavior and give enough trials of him doing that, it is absolutely feasible that we can apply this technology to figure out what he is writing in the sky. And I think if we can figure that out, we'll learn a lot more about who Easton is and how he thinks internally. I'm really excited by that. So I wanted to anchor to that.
That's awesome.
In terms of communication, if you have a question, feel free. I've got other stuff I was going to toss out there.
I was just going to say, you remember this? There was this discussion 2 months ago about how we're learning to understand the whale noises, right? And how we're trying using AI to decipher communicating with whales, right? And I'm sitting there and thinking, if we can learn to decipher whales, like we should learn how to apply that to like neurodivergence and solve that. And like you said, there's so much to uncover there, and I'm confident we can figure out a way to learn that language, right?
Yeah.
We think on the animal side, I think that the last I heard, like we think that we're going to understand dolphins and whales and quickly there was a recent podcast that I listened about this, and we're going to quickly be able to understand animals for sure. It's going to be fascinating.
I'm like, what are you doing? What are you guys doing out there?
Yeah,
there's a non-zero chance that this is. Yeah,
we have a lot of explaining to do. Yeah, for sure.
But it's interesting because just recently, with like you tapped into LCM before, right? Like, just if you look at the last 2 months, right, the technology that we now have at our hands, where not only is are the AI models becoming more capable at a smaller size, but also like we are getting to a point where now real time has become feasible. Right, and it's been a wild dream for a long period of time, but it has actually become feasible just in the last 30 to 60 days, and you have to think about that, right? And now we can actually get a real-time interpretation and transformation, and then also putting it back out. Yep. So just what you just explained before, like the ability to perceive and respond to the environment in a loop in real time is now feasible. And that unlocks a whole different universe.
and for every individual at scale, right? I think the key word here, and we precinct on this podcast in terms of like what we should or should not say applied to to autism, but I'll get a little maybe on the edge here. When you start to think of the world in spectrums, it clears up a lot and it provides a lot of empathy, right? And so
100%.
ASD spectrum is very, very wide. I've met hundreds of kids over the last 6 years that are, every single one of them is totally different, right? So that's a true statement. But you think about the political strife and some other things going on in the world, and the takeaway there is it seems to be many, if not the majority of human beings on the planet see the world in a binary way, A or B, and not as a spectrum. And so if you applied it to Easton, he's on the B side, right? He is a special needs person. They're all the same, right? They can't do stuff like we can on the A side, right? But there's other examples of this too. The one that it would be controversial to say potentially, but I think it's a no-brainer, is sexuality, right? Sexuality is a spectrum. If you see the world in binary, I can point you to people who want to do things like implement policy to make it so that LGBTQ people can't marry each other. That's a binary view of the world, not understanding that everybody is somewhere on the sexuality spectrum. You are not an A or a B. And there's other intelligence, athletic ability, whatever it is, everything is a spectrum. There is no such thing as binary except in trad computing, in ones and zeros, right? Where the term comes from. Everything else is a spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
and
we've
even
talked
there, we're
about.
likely to move away, right? In some point in the future,
Yeah.
if we get to quantum.
to probabilities. Yeah. So
Right.
we've talked about this before, of thinking in probabilities versus thinking in binary when assessing opportunities in front of us and potential risks, right? And it helps actually clarify a lot as we operate a business. It makes sense that the brain also works like that. If some of us have had the opportunity to build neural network deep learning models, and what are those? They're branching probabilities applied, right? And we built them as humble humans based off of our understanding of the neural network of our brains. So why, if our brains operate in probabilities, why wouldn't all of these possible skills and expressions be probabilities, aka spectrums, right?
100%. And that's actually a good, I guess, corollary to why we made the decision to stop ABA therapy and then go direct full-time school, right? And as I mentioned before, ABA is a medical practice. And so actually by law, they are not allowed to teach academics, right? And so he's 9, should be in 3rd grade. I sort of tell people this often, this notion that maybe one day we could cure autism, right? That would be phenomenal, right? But it would probably really only apply to very young children with it, right? 2, 3 years old, not necessarily a 9-year-old. It's not like you could fix that necessarily if it's DNA or whatever it is, right? You can't fix it and then all of a sudden he's going to wake up the next morning, he's at parity with his peers in a 3rd grade math class, because those connections in his brain were never formed. Just like a machine learning model, if you don't have the training data, there's no connection there and you can't infer off of it. And just like that, he wouldn't be able to just do that. That was the other kind of driving force behind thinking about like Easton's co-pilot, was this, the other side of the equation is, can we do something to attempt at least to keep him on track with his peers? On the academic side, you have a kid going through ABA, that's great, but like as it's working on goals or whatever, like can we introduce some learning academic side as well to make sure they don't fall too far behind and are squarely only focused on life skills. So I'm excited by that opportunity too, and I think that spans well beyond autism, obviously, too.
Can we rewind and hit a couple of questions that I don't think we hit at the top?
Yeah.
It may be helpful context. How many people are impacted by autism?
Last I saw, 1 in 40 children estimated this year will be diagnosed.
Wow. It's a lot.
It's a very large swath. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a massive population.
That's crazy. And then you talked about getting certified as special needs, which then led down the path of, by federal mandate, being able to get an IEP, which, if you could define IEP again, I missed it. I don't want to get the definition wrong. But the question being, like, how did you get certified? What does that mean? Like, you go to the equivalent of the DMV for autism, and you're like, I get my number in line and wait. Like, what does that process look like? How'd you even know that you need to do that, right? Like, what, can you walk me through that?
Yeah. First question for IEP, Individualized Education Plan.
Thank you.
Good on the federal government. This has been around for a very long time, and it's a mandate across all 50 states to make sure that specifically kids that maybe can't advocate for themselves are still getting the services that they deserve and that we deserve to give them. In terms of how we went through the process, I think the first is probably a lot like the 7 stages of grief in a lot of ways, in a fine way. It's not that this is negative or anything, right? But in terms of how we sort of processed it, Easton was our first kid, and so we didn't really have a great corollary to look at necessarily and say, like, oh, he's on track, or like necessarily there's something wrong. But right about 2 years old, we kind of knew, right? He very little interaction and was kind of always in his own little lane, right? And so the process was a medical one again, right? Like doctor referral to a psychologist, and then the psychologist meets with them for a couple hours and does some assessments. And these folks are trained and go through traditional medical school, and I think within 10 seconds they were ready to give the label. Mm-hmm. The part of the challenge, I think, and we never necessarily struggle with this, but I think a lot of parents do, which is the wrong word to use would be denial, fear. Like what does this mean for us, for them, for downstream impacts? Stuff you never thought about, like creating a special needs trust in case you die, so that he can have stuff and services and feed himself or whatever. So the first stage is really around like the humanity of it and like processing that and getting over the fear to say, we're going to do whatever we need to do to make sure he gets the services that he needs. And getting that autism diagnosis opened up a number of doors around Medicaid, a lot of additional programs, and then of course access to ABA therapy, which, by the way, you cannot get without a diagnosis. Had a candid conversation with a friend from the Web3 space the other day, and they're experiencing that in Virginia, where they sort of want to delay the diagnosis. Just they're not sure about the implications of that yet, but they wanted to get him into ABA therapy and just pay out of pocket for it. It turns out you can't. Which I thought was just very strange. You can
Do you know what the reasoning behind that is?
I don't. I'm not sure. It's policy driven. So something in the T's and C's. Not sure if it was on purpose or just a byproduct of that law. But
I was going to ask also, did you have to pay out of pocket for any of the assessments to get the certification, or was that all covered through insurance? Did you even have insurance then?
Yeah, had a full-time trad job at the time with good insurance, and it just kind of all ran through that. And we spent a lot of money to give him the things he needs, right? Insurance does help a lot. Can't anecdotally, and I don't have numbers to back this up, just talking to therapists at ABA centers, if insurance wasn't there and they did allow you to pay out of pocket, it would be many hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. It's pretty nuts, but rightly so. They have many people working there full time. They're well trained. They've got deep educational backgrounds, all versed on B.F. Skinner. You know, they're pros, and so they're worth the money for sure. But asking any family to have to pay that would be really impossible for almost everybody.
Being in the
Now think about 1 in 40 being impacted, and now try and extrapolate that into the amount of servicing care and infrastructure around that it currently needs to fulfill those needs, right? And now going back into the potential of augmenting that or helping with AI to do that, I'm thinking that would probably allow a lot more people, to get the care needed.
It's 1 in 40 now too. I mean, I would bet good money in the next couple years you're going to see that number go down to like 1 in 20 and then 1 in 10. I mean, just a couple years ago it was like 1 in 150. Literally
That's
a couple
interesting.
years ago. It's accelerating, right? And so
Do you reckon it's different because of the way is it because it is more commonly diagnosed now, or has the experience of what the spectrum is, and in that way the diagnosis expanded with it? Do you think are there also other changes? I mean, I'm asking because I just quite frankly don't know enough about it yet.
And I don't either. I think that's plausible, right? Better detection, number goes up. That means though that there's maybe it's a consistent number. It's always been 1 in 40, but back
Yeah.
a couple years ago, 1 in 85 didn't get diagnosed, which I think is interesting. I've got my own thoughts on how and why this may occur. I don't have any scientific backing. My mind goes to hereditary genes, and maybe, probably, but also I think the environment has a huge role here. Probably, right? This notion that we don't take good care of the earth, our water supply, our food supplies, Are we paying
A lot
the
of times not
consequence for
people either.
that? What's that?
I said, and a lot of times we're not taking great care of people either,
Yeah.
right? And especially those with mental health issues or other like you said, like sort of a binary world, people who are not like us. It's love humans at the same time. Like we've got some problems when it comes to helping each other. I'm interested, and I know just as we sort of wind down here at the top of the hour, I'm interested in talking about interfaces a little bit, right? And we at this point, we have all the interfaces available to us, which is whether it's VR, AR, audio, screens and apps, and potentially, implants, brainwave measures. I don't even know what we call them.
Neuralink.
Neuralink, right? It'll be interesting. My question is a little bit like, as we start to sort of think about interfaces, like what are the best interface? What do we think the best interfaces are? Right now, the interface really is tablets and a screen. That tends to be where the apps exist today. Where do we think the interfaces are in the next 5-10 years? Actually, let me take it back. Where's the interface that? Let me take the question a little bit. Where's the interface that we think that we can have the most impact as we drive towards Easton's co-pilot? What does that interface look like to sort of accomplish the things that we've talked about in terms of helping people?
It's a good
And
question.
maybe putting that to Bob, like what is he responding best to in your experience so far?
Well, I think the answer for Easton is rooted in the skills he's looking to acquire, right? Which is communication. So I lean towards audio with him, which is part of the reason we position the POC in the way it is, right? It's sort of the cleanest path to test this out. And then also think it aligns really well to him, this notion of audio cues to him so that he can internalize what's being said, process it, and then practice outbound communication in the same mode. I don't know what the answer to the broader question is, other than I think the opportunity could be the right interface at the right time given the individual, so long as the experience sort of follows them from device to device, from interface to interface, and is consistent. I guess we'll see. I don't know, Calvin, you're the UX whiz. What do you think?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it quite a little bit. I think I'm on the same page with you in terms of it does depend on the person, right? Like we said, it is a spectrum, and like there's a variety of, maybe call them impairments, that, where it makes sense to act differently. I mean, I do have the same feeling though that audio gets a very long way because it is comparatively less intrusive and is easier to, get to you than, trying to focus on a certain visual that, a visual requires a lot of focused attention, which, might not be ideal for some. And on the other hand, so that's I think what we said, like I think in the near term, audio is probably a very good mechanism, is my hunch. But going from there, like going to the other end of the extreme, like what might this look like in 20 years or, whatever time, however many time it takes, is if we're looking at implant, it's an interesting question, right? Like what if you start to use that transformer to actively change your perception on the fly in a multi-sensory experience, just as we're thinking about multimodality in the AI transformer world today, right? It's the same scary thought as well as we might get there, right? If you look at the current trajectory of the implant world just the last year as well, right? So do we want to be there, and how intrusive do we want to be, I think is a very big question to ask that we quite frankly don't even know the right questions for yet.
Yeah,
but like I said, in the short term, audio feels good.
And I'm not in love with the notion of an implant, and only because I'm a little bit of even though we spend all day building AI as a business, I'm kind of a doomer when it comes to it, honestly. Like, if it's an implant, what happens when I tell the AI agent, all right, let's turn the session off, and it's like, nope, I'm good. We're going to leave this going. And you're like stuck in Inception, in the second layer. At least if it's a neural
scary thought
that sits on the head, like mom and dad can come over after now, like take it off, right? Like, hey, are you okay?
For sure.
That kind of worries me, but I think Neuralink is very interesting. It's the common denominator across all modes, right? Like some kids can't see, some kids can't hear, some kids can't, walk or use their hands. There's a lot of, let's say, hurdles across the board. So, right, being able to go multimodal, I think, is really the answer to your question. Like, have it be a little bit agnostic.
Does the perfect or so in terms of devices available to us right now, right? And when you think about Easton drawing, right, or you think about other environmental stuff, we can get a little ways with inbound audio and translating what's going on in the environment. But at this, like, I'm wondering, does this, video capture, real-time video capture goes a long way as well, like, using, and then you have the potential to use Vision, Google Vision and other tools to translate that. But does this actually does this look like rabbit? Does this, or like human? I know there's also the pendant that sort of consumes all day long. What do you guys think?
I think you'll
what does the device look like?
Hopefully it's us, right? I think you're going to see a lot of optionality out there, right? And maybe it starts in neurodivergence / healthcare. It may not. It may be something else that's repurposed and fits well in this world, like the lapel pin or whatever.
Well, and I'm kind of asking
it might have different
requirements.
Sorry, it might have different requirements compared to the standard consumer tech that is out there, right? Just in how it needs to be. Like if you look at a lot of medical devices, and speaking of what you said before with sort of the development skills too, they used to say like if you want to be a really good programmer that gets so well that you don't actually produce bugs, then start in medical development, uh, because there's definitely where you're going to be trained the hardest to not do that, and be also punished the hardest if you do it. But same goes for the actual physical devices, right? So like medical has some of the highest requirements on standards to actually build a device. So we might as well see, because it needs to be more rugged, for example, right? Like it might fall down 100 times more. And there might be a lot of other things. Then, it might shake a lot more. So, you might need a different type of software to kind of get the shakiness out of it. And so there might be a lot of different requirements which is part of the reason why I don't know if the consumer devices will be the first to help in that area, but we will see.
So,
Dave,
I mean, how do
my
we?
mind kind of goes like with yours, right? Is like if there's a proliferation of tech that's out there now that's in people's hands that could then be used and purposed. Like, how many more people can you help and how quickly, versus needing to get specialized hardware in place, right? Just we've watched iPhones change people's lives even that aren't on the spectrum. For example, I saw someone that was in a fender bender car accident and they happened to be deaf, and they were typing on their phone and holding it up to the police to like make their police report, and that was the fastest way for them to communicate. As an example, it's just like, yeah, they have that right in their pocket, and of course you could extend that, turn audio on, and do lots of things. So we've seen the power of having computers in our pocket extend that. And maybe it is like a little bit more extra device, Calvin, right? Maybe it is like, great, your iPhone, your phone plus your earpiece that happens to be the special earpiece, and we jammed a whole bunch of tech in it as well. Your phone plus these special version of the Ray-Bans that take the meta cameras pointing out and actually doubles them, right? Like what, maybe it's combinations like that.
Peripherals. Yeah, you're probably right there. Like pick the peripheral that meets the need around the accessibility or issue to solve. But ultimately, we all have the supercomputer in our pocket. It's also really exciting that we can run models on those devices now to like get around the HIPAA issues, right? Like maybe we don't store any of this data anywhere. It just lives on the device that they're using, right? Give them the ability to offline it, and back it up, and bring it back in if they get a new phone or whatever, but just sort of, not worry about things like data mining on pieces like this, right? Other than for the things you might need for like UX improvement, but in terms of the individual, I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe even we will get to a point where we can do the training. I mean, we're very far away from that. But like if we get to the point where we can do training and execution on smaller devices, then you're at a point where you can really get to what we said at the beginning of this cast, which is truly personalized inference for, any type of use cases.
Yeah, amazing. So we're at the top. Thank you guys. This has been an awesome conversation. Awesome to learn about Easton and your all's life with him, and really unpack this subject, because I'm excited to put this into practice over the next few weeks, and start to think about prototyping and sort of getting to a demonstrable state of where we can make a difference here. So thank you all.
Support, and thanks for bringing the subject up. I think it's worth talking about, and so I appreciate you guys being there for us and having the convo.
100%. It ends up being such an awesome arena to solve really interesting problems. Awesome. Thank you. So this has been the What If We Could show with MeshMesh, and you all have a good one.
See ya.
Bye.